Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the PMI Calumet Chapters first quarter 2020 meeting. I'm Dan Zeli, your Vice President of Technology. We want to get started today and say thank you, everyone, for attending our virtual event. And with the virtual event comes a bunch of new challenges. One being that it's a new format with a new system. This one's called freeconferencecall.com, recommended by PMI. So in the next 2 minutes that I have left on our agenda, just want to go over some quick housekeeping business, give you some heads up on some other PDU opportunities. Our president, Joe Mays, talks about some chapter business. Kelly will go ahead and introduce our speaker, and then our speaker, Henry, will. So currently, statistics are showing that we have 20 people registered for the event who've accepted. We also have another 5 that are tentative, and the rest are somewhere in between. I want to thank the people from PMI Region 2, PMI Northeast Indiana, and PMI Chicagoland who are also joining in. Welcome to PMI Calumet as we're doing our part in sharing in our technology. First off, the important part is on the CCRS PDU reporting. This is a 1 PDU event. The event code is C256, H is in Henry, Y, D, L, W, V. That'll be also broadcast in the chat portion here momentarily, and you can also find that on our social media sites on LinkedIn under the PMI Calumet chapter group, or available on Twitter at PMI Calumet. Next thing I'd like to talk about real quick is our branding. PMI, as you know, in the last 3 months has decided that we're going to change our brand and has come up with a new mantra. We're going from the old blue PMI that they've had for over a dozen years and are now going to this new up-and-coming project management, project economy logo, and you'll see our logo on the screen there. That's going to make some new challenges for us as there's new energy, it's a new year, and new opportunities. More to come, just watch our social media sites. With that, you're going to see a bunch of different symbols on here. I'm not going to go over all of these here in the interest of time, but there is a method to their madness where they talk about the 9 pillars here of collaboration, determination, change, innovation, teamwork, outcomes, growth, vision, and community. That said, that forms up the project economy. Watch in the next couple of weeks as we go ahead and we'll have the change in brand video showing up on our social media sites on the project economy. With that, I'm going to turn over the show to our president, Mr. Joe Mays. Joe?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dan, for that intro, and thank you to the team for getting this set up, and of course, Henry for joining us today and giving us it's going to be a great presentation. Let's talk about a few things. At the PMI Region 2 level, they're dealing with the COVID-19 as well, and what we've been told is that the Region 2, the L2 limb has been canceled. And what we'll end up doing is they'll push into the October event instead. In addition, they are recommending that we hold virtual networking and events similar to this one tonight, which we already had planned, fortunately. And they may even recommend that for Q2 and future ones as well. On top of that, they talked about the military initiative and all the work that's going in there. And there is a growing interest in that, as well as a growing population that are trying to use that platform to sign up. Some of the updates with regards to our membership. So we've got about 130 members at last count, which is flat to earlier this year, and then a little bit down from 2019. We had 134, depending on when you checked, in 2019. So we're basically flat. Retention is up from 2019. We're at 73% retention. And I wanted to welcome a couple of new board members. We've all met Kelly, Dan, Jay, and those folks, and Wendy and but we also have some new board members. Jonte Robinson and Ed McDermott have joined our board, so thank you to them for joining us. They've done fantastic work already, ramping up our social media and website work. In 2020, you'll see us more presence in the social media with Dan's leadership and Jonte and Ed supporting. On top of that, as you mentioned, the branding is coming up, and then we'll continue to have quarterly activities. We will push the second quarter activity to the end of the second quarter, hoping that we get some relief from the COVID-19 so we can do another in-person event. If it still is looking like more challenging, we will probably do a virtual one instead. Beyond that, we have summer events planned. In the third quarter, we had Griffith Fest last year. That was a big success. We are leaning on that, and potentially we'll probably move forward with that. And then that was probably the last thing, my preview. So any questions for me in terms of our response and anything we can do to support you, the PMs in the Calumet chapter, from a COVID-19 response or as a chapter? Hearing none, I will kick it over to Kelly Milosevic for the introduction of Will. Kelly? Hello? Is anybody there?
Oh, I'm sorry, you can't hear me. Joe,
oh, there's
can
Kelly.
You hear me?
Now I can hear you, Kelly.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Thanks, everyone, for joining, and thank you most of all to Henry for presenting for us today. I just wanted to give a quick introduction or reintroduction for those of you who are meeting Henry for the first time or listening to him present for us again. Henry and I first met many years ago when at the time we were both IBMers, and I came to know of Henry because he had a great reputation within the company, and on huge calls was always like kind of name dropped. People would go to him as a go-to project manager, and he asked a lot of questions and was very curious about solving problems and put that thoughtful innovation towards getting to a solution. So I really respected that and asked him to become a mentor of mine. So over the years, thankfully, I'd like to say we've kept in touch and become friends, and Henry presented for us last year, which was on mentoring at the time. We had a lot of great feedback from that, and it really kicked off our mentor pairing within the chapter. So that was a great success, and we're lucky to have him back again this year to present for us. So I know that above all things like coaching and mentoring and things like that, Henry is very agile and has included some very timely tips into his presentation today that I'm excited to hear about. Henry, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. Henry, are you there?
Yes, I am here. I muted myself, and then I unmuted myself and muted myself again. Can you hear me now?
Great. Yes, we can. And do you have the presentation rights, I think?
Yeah, he's going to transfer control to me so that I can present my slides. Just be a moment here.
No problem. Thank you so much. I know you've, I don't want to steal your thunder, but in addition to your regular lessons learned from reality project management, I know you've made some recent updates to add even more timely material. So we're really excited to see that.
Yeah, I'm going to be talking this evening about some stories for project management. So this off here, thanks for giving me control of the slides. I think you should be able to see the first slide there, lessons learned from reality project management. Can you see that?
We can.
Okay, super. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you some stories. The first one I wanted to tell you about is one I was sharing with a fellow project manager that I met at the company that I'm currently contracting at, and he thought this was a great story, so I thought this would be a good one to tell. You know, all of us have a time when we maybe we'll think that we want to take it to the next level with project management. It might be that we decide to go for one of the credentials, right? So back in the day, I decided that I wanted to go for my PMP, my Project Management Professional certification, and the company that I worked for had a bunch of people that were taking classes in that, and I asked them if they would please help me out and tell me what books they were reading and what they were using to study for the exam. And I started reading the PIN book, and I got to the chapter on risk. And it just was really interesting to me. I was like, wow, I could start trying to use this stuff, you know. So I'm reading through the chapter on risk, and I'm thinking to myself, how can I use this? Well, at the time, I was working as a program manager, and I had to go around and visit just different teams and ask them about their various reports of things that they were working on. And this was on Y2K, so that's putting us back in the dark ages, I guess, as far as some of us might be. But on Y2K, I'd have to go around to all these different places and find out who was compliant. So I went to a meeting one day, and everybody was sitting around the conference table and getting their reports, and they finally got to the point of reporting on Y2K, and they gave their standard report. And I got feeling a little brazen at the point. And I said, you know, these are all good reporting. You know, I'm just wondering, if something was to go wrong with this, what would it be? Like, is there anything that could go wrong? Is there anything that would prevent us from attaining these results that you have here, that you're predicting that you're going to make all these dates? And, you know, it was kind of like very quiet in the room. You could hear a pin drop as everybody sat around the conference table, and everybody kind of looked at each other. And finally, somebody said, there's a guy downstairs in the shipping and receiving department that said something about that there's a piece of equipment that might have a problem, something with a vendor or something. And I said, well, when we're done with this meeting, could you take me down and introduce me to him? So we went downstairs to the shipping and receiving department, and I'm down there, and we're waiting for the guy to come, and he comes, and I said to him, you know, I'm from the program that's overlooking all this with Y2K, and I was wondering, what do you think could possibly go wrong with meeting the dates that we have? And he said, well, there's this one piece of equipment that's used all over in the network, and it's a pretty big network. I mean, this was actually a telecommunications company, and he said, you know, so far we're having some issues with with this piece of equipment. And I said, really, could you give me a little bit more information on that? You know, what's the name of the vendor, and what are you having problems with? And I started communicating with them, and we found out, just by me asking that one question about what could go wrong, we found out that this one piece of equipment that was used all over in the network was a piece of equipment that was very important to the network, but was not going to be finished being ready in time, and there was going to be a big problem with that. So we had to engage the vendors, and we had to go and we had to talk to all of the general managers that oversaw all the pieces of the network around the world. So before you knew it, we had a war room set up, and all the suits were in, as we say, all the suits, all the executives, all the general managers were pulled in by one of the senior VPs, one at a time, into this war room, and we had to interview them to find out how they were going to fix this problem with this one piece of equipment that needed to be fixed. So just from asking one question, it turned into this powerful thing of a war room that lasted for several weeks. I think it was maybe even 6 weeks that this lasted. And we had these guys coming in suits, really high-profile people within the company had to, you know, the SVP said, you know, this has to be fixed, and we have a deadline, and we're going to miss the deadline. For those of you that weren't involved in Y2K, that date was not going to be met. We had to have things fixed before things rolled over to the year 2000. So he brought them all in. He said, "You got to come in person." So they flew in from all different locations, all these suits. And with all that pressure, and with the SVP being present and his EA being present in the meetings, they knew that they had to get this done, and they did get it done. So that's a funny story. It's a good one, but it's amazing as a project manager how answering, or in this case, asking one question can really find something. It was a discovery that otherwise may not have been found, and they may have had network problems throughout their network if it wasn't for me studying the PMBOK and happening to be interested in that chapter that I was studying that month. So there you go. Sometimes as a project manager, we can ask the right questions. Here's another story that I wanted to tell you about. This one is about a remote team. So I was working in a company, and actually it was the same company as a contractor and as a consultant. And we were working on a project for an insurance company, and the work was going to be done in Canada. I had hired a project manager that lived close to where the client was, but did not live close to where we were doing the work in Canada. So I had asked her several times, because I oversaw several project managers, if she'd be willing to go up and meet with the team. And there was always some reason why she couldn't make it. Can you folks hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Yeah, yes, I hear you fine.
So I told her that, if she didn't go up to visit the team sometime in the near future, that I was going to have to make a visit, because we just had to find out really what was going on up there. And she said, don't worry, everything's under control. But she was not able to make it, so I went up to visit the team. And during one of her regular weekly conference calls, I sat with the people at the table, around the table in the small conference room there. We had a team of about 12 people at the time. And we all sat around the table, and while I was sitting there and listening to them all give their reports, I looked at their faces. And I was like, wow, I'm not really sure that they're getting her the whole story. I was able to read the body language, which at the time we were just using a conference call. We didn't have some of this newer technology that allows us to share our video and whatnot. And when the conference call was done, she said, well, that's really great. It sounds like we're on track for this and everything's on schedule. And she finished up the call. And when she did, everybody stood up and started leaving the room. And I said, no. Shut the door. Everybody sit down. I want to talk to you for a minute. Well, of course, I was new to the team. They didn't really know me from anybody, but they knew that I was the manager over the top of the project manager. So they listened to me. They closed the door, and they all sat down. And I said, well, I was just wondering, everybody here seemed to give you reports and made it sound like everything was looking good, right? You were telling her that everything's on target and everything, but when I look at your faces and I read your body language, I'm not sure, but it sounds like maybe there's a problem that we haven't surfaced. Could you do me a favor and just tell me how you guys feel about making these dates? Do you really think you're going to make them? And again, you could have heard a pin drop in the room. I think you heard a few crickets in the background. And eventually, somebody that was very brave started out by saying, well, this one date that, is kind of far out, we're not really sure about that one. That's pretty far away, and, we're not really sure that we're going to be able to make that, And I said, okay, what are the reasons, and are there any other things that are closer by? Well, once one person opened the conversation, it was like a flood of all these people telling me things that were going wrong, right? And things that could go wrong. So I had all kinds of issues and risks to address. And in a way, I guess this is a good reason to use video calls like we do when we have a virtual team. That's important to do that because we want to see their body language. And recently somebody asked a question to me, what kind of advice would you give to people holding virtual meetings? I think this was out on LinkedIn. Actually, it was at the place where I'm working now, and I replied that probably the first thing is to share videos so that you can read people's facial expressions, because just of my experience with that. So it went on that, people started to get to know me and they started to trust me on the team. I would fly up to Canada every week and be with the team. And at one point somebody told me, the summertime is coming up in Canada. We have our festivals in the summer. People are having to work a lot of long hours because of the problems that we're having on the project. But you know what? Coming up in a little bit more than a month, people are not going to be working long hours. They're going to want to be going to all these festivals that we have here. So there was another thing that I had to solve. And the reason I tell this part of the story is that it's important to understand the culture of where your team is located. Sometimes people have things that they want to attend. Even sometimes it's persons within the team that might have reasons why they have to be home for something, or maybe they do volunteer work, or maybe they're going to school or something. So there might be certain individuals, and you have to listen to them and find out what the reasons are why they might not be able to put in the number of hours that you need. In this case, it was something where it was a cultural thing that the whole team was going to be involved in that. So as project managers, we have to have a handle on what it is that people are feeling and what their personal lives are like. I think that with everything that we've got going on now with the coronavirus, the COVID-19, this is something that we really could learn from, is listening to the team. Another thing that I found when I worked with that team was that, because I was only traveling up there for a few days a week, and I still had leadership for several other projects, I couldn't be there all the time. I had other work that I needed to do. So I needed to identify a leader. So here's a picture here that I got this off of Pixabay. But if this was your team as a project manager, who here would you pick? Just looking at this picture, and I know looking at a picture is not enough to determine who a leader would be, but who in this team would you pick to be the leader? And why? Any comments?
If they're all leaders?
Could be any of them, yeah.
Very good answer. They're all leaders. Yes, everybody on the team is a leader in one way or another. Everybody's looking to other people. But if you had to pick one leader, which one do you think you pick?
The one in the middle.
Why would that be?
Seems to be the most engaged. She seems to be talking and directing. And the man in the plaid shirt seems to be fully engaged with whatever she's saying.
Yeah, it's interesting. Thank you very much for that input. I think, of course, you're not going to be able to judge a leader just from one photograph. But, yeah, I mean, if you look at the people on the team, I would say that probably, like you said, the person in the checkered shirt, the young woman over here on the right-hand side, actually both of you women on the right-hand side seem to be looking at her. The person standing in the back in the middle, he's kind of looking over to that person that's on the right-hand side, and she's looking at the one in the middle. So, I mean, to me, it looks like maybe that person would be a leader. And, this, again, is something where, and again, you can't tell from looking at a photograph, but one of the things that we need to do as project managers is we have to sometimes identify what the roles are of everybody on the team, and not just the roles as far as the work that they do, but who are the ones that are looked at and are looked up to on the team, because they're the people that maybe could be your evangelists. Maybe you don't need to pick out a team lead because maybe you have a situation where you could be part of the team all the time. But you may have to pick out somebody that's kind of like the team evangelist, the one that you can go to get new initiatives going on the team. And, maybe here in this one we would pick the person in the middle. But another thing that you might want to look at too is like this person that's in the back. on the left-hand side, she's just kind of standing there, and she doesn't even seem to be engaged in the conversation. So another thing that we need to do as project managers and leaders is we have to find ways to engage the people that are not engaged. So maybe if I was involved in a meeting and these 6 people were there and we were talking, maybe I would ask that person that's on the back, on the left-hand side, what are your thoughts? What do you think about what people are suggesting here? And try to get them engaged. So it's important as a project manager for us to look at people's body language. Again, it's also important to look to see how they're involved and how they're engaged. This is true even if we have virtual calls. Everybody knows when you're on a virtual call that there's certain people that tend to take over the call, and they'll put in their 2 cents, and they'll make sure that their opinion is heard, and they'll be very forceful about taking over time, and you may need to put certain constraints on the call, certain guiding rules for the team where, hey, you get to talk for a minute and you have to let somebody else talk. And if you have people that aren't talking on the team, then maybe you need to involve them in the conversation, either when everybody's together, or if they're kind of people that maybe don't like to talk in front of a group, maybe you have to pull them aside same time after the meeting. Another thing that happened on the team was that we noticed after a while that there was a certain team member that was always fumbling the ball, as we say. It just seemed as though for some reason we noticed that a lot of times we were tracking, I was making sure that we were tracking all of the deliverables that different people on the team had to produce. And we noticed that one of the people started to drop the ball on a lot of them and was not pulling through on delivering what they needed to. And, I started noticing that a little bit, and I thought, I talked to the person, and, they assured me that they had some reasons why they weren't able to deliver. They had some dependencies and whatnot. But after I had gone up there a few weeks, the person that I picked as a leader, actually, for the team, kind of pulled me aside and said, hey, that person is not pulling their weight. Everybody's pulling together, we're all pulling hard. And imagine this, you've got here a bunch of guys pulling on a rope. Imagine if, say, the second guy in line decided he was going to stand up and just eat a sandwich or something, and all of a sudden decided we're just going to stand back and watch everybody else do the work. And I don't know, there's maybe 10, 12 people here in this line. Well, they all have to pick up for him and carry his weight pulling this rope. Well, that's what was happening with the team. I found out that what was happening was that everybody else was trying to make up for this person that wasn't carrying their weight. They were all doing the brunt of the work and trying to pull in the direction, but this other person wasn't, just wasn't pulling the weight, wasn't contributing to the team. And I had to actually pull this person aside and tell them that unless they fix things very short order, that I was going to have to remove them from the team. And actually, that person did not pull through, and we lost contact with this person, believe it or not. But I told everybody if he ever comes back, we're going to have to tell him that we're going to have to let him go because he's just not doing his part. Another interesting thing that happened with this project is that we were heavily dependent on a database for the client that we were working on. And after I had been on the project for a few months, I realized that we kept seeming to make no progress in this one area. So we had 2 database administrators that were working on store procedures and this type of thing for the project. And I went to them and I started asking around the team, what's going on here? Why do we seem to be not making much progress with the deliverables that we have? And I ended up talking to the DBAs, and they said, well, the reason why is because the client tells us that they're in the process of an application that uses the same database we do, and they're making changes to their database, and they're quite wide-sweeping. And it's not like they came up with one design and just made that change, but these are continual changes all the time, and they're surprises to us. And so what was happening was that the foundation of the software that we were developing was being changed right out from underneath us. almost like if you were building a building and somebody decided to change the foundation while you were building a building. You can imagine how shaky that building would be. So what I had to do is I had to go back to the team and say, look, we're going to have to take all of the changes that they've given us over the past, let's say, two months. I need to have them all documented, and I need to go back to them, and I would work together with the COO of the company, and I would have to go back to the COO and say, look, these are the reasons why we're having some problems with progress, is because your team is changing the database that we need to work with, and it's causing us a lot of time. It took us almost a week and a half to have the people on my team go and pull all this evidence because there were so many emails and communication with this case. So this is something we have to do as a project manager too, is we constantly have to have a feeling for what's going on a project. Here's another story about a project that I worked on. Are we behind schedule? Does that ever happen to a project manager that we get behind schedule? This is going back to the time when I worked on video games. Yes, I worked on Super Nintendo video games. I was a project manager. At one point I was actually a director in a company over a bunch of different games. And sometimes what would happen when we worked, I also worked on consumer electronics, is we would get behind schedule. And back then, I don't know how it is now. I haven't talked to people in the video game industry, although I still know them. I kind of talk to them on a more personal level than I do about their work. But back then, the deadlines were very tight, and they wanted to make a video game for the Christmas holidays. And whenever we started to run behind on some of our projects, we would move people around between the projects. So if there was a very important one that we really wanted to make sure that one met the deadline, we'd take people off of one project and put them onto that one. What do you think happened when we took people off of one project and put them onto another one? Any opinions on that or thoughts on that? Have any of you ever had a situation you took people off of one project and put them on another, or you added a bunch of resources to a project?
You have to account for transition time and to get people to get them up to speed.
Right. And do you find that the project actually goes quicker when you add more people?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily, right. And this would happen a lot of times. We've had people on a project, and we find out that it actually slowed down the project. And I can tell you that one of the reasons for that is, for those of you that remember, when you're studying for the PIN block, we talk about the number of communications that goes on between nodes, right? And the more people you have on the project, the more each person has to communicate with. This is the reason why, I'm also a Scrum Master, and I'm also certified in Scaled Agile Framework. One of the things we talk about is using small teams, right? We use teams that say, usually less than a dozen people, I think it's something like 5 to 9 people in that range. And the reason why is because we want to cut down on the communications that go on within a project. So one of the things you might want to think about when you're working with a team is if it's a fairly large team, maybe it makes sense to kind of take that team and break it into a bunch of smaller teams and have them each take different responsibilities. And by doing that, you might end up reducing the number of interfaces between those members and start to be able to speed the team up. Also, if you are running behind, just like I think that was Kelly that chimed in there, you have to think about, when you add people on, what is the impact going to be? They're not going to start contributing right away, most likely. They have to be onboarded. They have to learn about what's going on. Maybe there's machines that need to be set up or whatever. But there could be a lot of things that would impact how long they're going to be able to contribute. And depending on how far along the project is, it may not even be advantageous to add those people. And one of the things that maybe you've heard this said before. If you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, right? So, think about the size of your teams, because the more people you add to a team, the slower it's going to go. Although, like the African proverb, you might be able to go far together, and if it's a long-range project, then maybe it makes sense to add more people. I'll tell you another story about election time. So this is going back to around the year 2000. Actually, I think this was the first project I worked on after Y2K, and it was about what's called as the first legally binding internet election. Many of you might know that some places still cast ballots in a ballot box, maybe not as old as this one, but there are places that still cast ballots in ballot boxes that I know of, or at least there was back then. And the Arizona Democratic Convention had asked for this company to come up with a internet voting so that people could vote online. And they wanted to open up that internet voting for a number of days prior to the actual face-to-face election. So people could decide if they wanted to vote online or they could go into their polling place. And this was held in Arizona in the year 2000. There was a company that was working on it, and they realized when they started to get close to the deadline that they weren't sure that they were going to be able to meet the deadline. They needed some help. So they pulled in our consulting company 7 weeks before the election was going to happen. So we had 7 weeks to do this amazing project with all the security that was involved. I ended up speaking to one of the other project managers where we were, and I spoke to our manager, and I said, 7 weeks is a very short period of time. I don't think that we're going to be able to solve this with one project manager. What I would like to suggest is that we have two project managers. One works on the development of the software, and another one works on getting the infrastructure ready, and the security for the network, and the security for all these ballots. Because as you could tell, when you hold an internet election, there are several rules around elections, and one of them is that we don't want people to be able to vote twice. And we also want to make sure that when everybody votes, that we know that we've collected their votes. So what we did was we brought in several very top-level security experts. At the time, we had somebody that was one of the top certified cybersecurity experts in the world. We brought him in along with a bunch of other people that were top-level security experts, and they told us how it was that the website was going to work and how the voting ballots are going to be done. And then we also hired in a team of developers, and we hired in some people that were, I guess you'd say, administrative people that would take care of all the administrative work that needed to be done. And we started working on this in a place not too far from New York City, and we started adding more and more people to work on this as we realized it was getting closer and closer to the deadline. I was actually working in New York City trying to locate one of the best hosting sites at the time. I had 3 vendors that I was looking at, and I was going between their buildings to look at their locations to see that they had a lot of repetition and everything that they did. I wanted to make sure that there was no single point of failure. So I ended up going with a vendor that had not only more than one generator for their infrastructure that they had there in their data center. They had multiple generators. They also had multiple companies that would supply gas to their generators. They had multiple internet lines coming into the facility. They had multiple full circuitry with 2 different electrical circuits throughout the whole building, and so on and so forth. When it came to the day when, again, I was working with the infrastructure group, and when I had them working on ordering the equipment, when the equipment came in, we found out that all the pieces of equipment were there. We were so happy that everything came as we ordered it. We had duplicates of everything. We had duplicates of servers that were going to run in parallel with each other in case one went down, et cetera, et cetera. And then we found out that the power cord for the servers had a different plug on it than what was in the server cabinets. So we couldn't plug in any of the servers. I don't know how many of you know this, but when you work in New York City, you can't just call up an electrician and ask them to come in. You've got to do it through the union. And you've got to schedule it. And this was going to be a big delay to the schedule. It looked like a nice big red mark when you talk about, looking at your schedule. That was a big, nice big red mark on the critical path. So, we tried as best as we can to call out what favors we could and contacted everybody we knew. We finally got somebody in to get that plug changed on the equipment there so that we could plug in our servers. Everything was up and running. It came to the day of the election, and at this point, we had worked right up to the last minute. I was actually told the guys, look, I'm going to go down to one of the equipment rooms and sleep on the floor for a couple hours. I was sleeping on the floor, and not too much longer, the guys came in and woke me up. They said, we think we're having a denial of service attack. I don't know how many of you know what that is, but basically this is something that back in the year 2000 was something that happened, I think, probably more frequently back then because we didn't have the equipment to do these, to resolve these types of attacks. But the idea is that basically people would set up all these servers to call into that one web server all at the same time, so that the traffic was just astronomical and it would bring the servers down and nobody would be able to get through to make their votes for the election. Well, this thing went on and we brought in the cybersecurity experts and everybody, I don't know how many of you ever worked in a data center, but they usually only let one guy in at a time. We had a whole crowd of people around these two racks in this data center, which, if any of you have worked in a data center, it's quite cold in a data center. So we all had our coats on in the middle of the summer, trying to, get this equipment working again. And everybody was coming up with ideas and whatnot. But then it just went away magically, and everything seemed to be okay. So the election went through. The election was a big success, and it got lots of advertising, and of course the media covered it and everything. Actually, if you go out and Google it, the Arizona Democratic election in the year 2000, you'll find some links. But we never really figured out what was going on with that, and maybe about 6 months later, I was back in our home office, and I was talking to a guy, and he said, hey, Henry, guess what? I had a problem with this server that I'm working on, and this is a new technology where they have two processors in the same server. And when I had the two processors plugged in, all of a sudden it looked like there was tons and tons of traffic coming into the server, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. So I shut it down, and I pulled out the second processor board and turned it back on, and everything was fine. It ended up that we had uncovered a defect in the way that this server worked for having dual processor boards that we didn't realize until 6 months later that here's what the problem was. So sometimes things like that happen on a project that you're working on too, where you may never find out what the issue is. It might just magically go away, but that doesn't mean that you have to leave it behind and never look into it again. We were not able to diagnose what it was because we couldn't reproduce it, but it was interesting finding out what it was later. So what about resources? We talk about resources on projects, and we call people resources. Machines are resources. We call them resources too, but are people really the same thing as machines? Well, sometimes we think, gee, if I have a machine, it runs really good. Resources have all these personal problems and issues and personalities and everything, but machines break down too. Machines have to be maintained. We have to spend time maintaining machines. So why shouldn't we maintain people, and why shouldn't we allow people to break down too? That happens, just like it does for a machine. One of the things that I decided right off with everything that's going on with coronavirus, and we have this lockdown and everybody's being told to keep their distance from one another and everything is, I realized just recently that there was, we had an issue that with somebody that I was talking to where they were very upset about something, and it just seemed to be that they were overly upset. And then I thought back to, gee, everybody's going through this stuff, you know, just give everybody a little bit of flexibility, a little bit of leeway, and allow them to blow up every once in a while. It ended up not really being much of anything, but a few years ago, a pastor told us in a sermon that he was preaching, he was working overseas. He was a missionary, and he was in an area where there was a lot of guerrilla warfare going on, and they were getting closer and closer, and he realized he wasn't afraid of it, but his team was. So he had to pull his team out because they were underperforming. And he told me about this graph, if you want to say, although he didn't refer to it as the Yerkes-Dodson law, but later on I found out that's what it's called. If you notice this graph right here, if you look at the solid line, let's just talk about that one. And down at the bottom, this is along that axis about arousal. Think about it as stress, right? I think everybody knows that if you give a little bit of stress to things, as project managers, if we follow up on dates, remind people about dates, we give them a little bit of stress to make sure that they're thinking about making the dates and stuff, and they'll start to perform a little bit better if we give them a little bit of stress, right? The performance starts to go up. But if we give too much stress, then after a while the performance will start to go down, which is on the right-hand side of this curve. They start to become where they're distracted, they start to forget about things, they're not good at decision making, maybe they're trying to multitask because they're trying to get more work done. Their productivity is just going to go down when these things happen. So this is what I like to refer to as, you have to be careful how much stress people are getting, because if they get too much stress, it turns into distress. And that's what that pastor told us about. So think about this as far as what your teams are going through today, but not even just today with this whole COVID-19 virus going around, but just in general. What kind of stress are people putting up with? What kind of stress do they have at home? I think I mentioned that last year when I spoke about mentoring and coaching too. You know, this is the Maslow's Hierarchy, and if you think about Maslow's Hierarchy, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with it, at the bottom, Maslow says that you have to have your physiological needs met first, and then your needs for safety, and then if you have them met, then you go out and try to get your social needs met, and if you have all those needs met, then you work on your self-esteem, and then self-actualization, and then transcendence, which is basically altruism. It's helping others. Is a big part of feeling really great about yourself, is by helping others. It says in the Bible that it's better to give than it is to receive, right? So, you know, that's important to think about this in terms of what people are going through today. You know, you hear all these people hoarding things, and, you know, even when you have a storm, you know, oh, what did everybody do? They go out and buy milk and bread. Milk and bread is shorted because they're down at the bottom of the pyramid there, thinking about physiological needs. And that's what we're seeing today with people hoarding different things, and things are out of stock in the stores. And then also people today are, with this COVID virus, are also concerned about their safety, their physical safety, and their emotions are just totally out of whack. And a lot of people are really concerned about their financial aspects. You know, where's the money going to come from? What about my job? That type of thing. So think about the fact that you may not be able to get people producing at the top parts of this pyramid because they're concerned about the bottom. And you might also think about the Kublerross 5 stages of grief, too. That there's a lot of people today that are in denial about what's going on. I think maybe you saw that in the beginning when the virus started to become more prevalent in the area that you live in. Maybe you start to say, oh, well, first people just don't even believe it, and then they start to get angry, and they're going to bargain, and then they start to accept it, and then they get depressed about it. So, and one of the things about the 5 stages of grief here is that you have to realize people can go back and forth between any of these in any order, and there's no rhyme or reason or no rules as to how long they're going to last. But I think I may have told this story a few times before. I'm not sure if you've all heard it, but when I did oversee a bunch of project managers, I sent one out to find out what was going on with the project. And when he came back, he took a marker off my whiteboard and drew a big giant C. He says, Henry, it's the big C. I said, Tom, I can think of a lot of things that are the big C. What big C are you talking about? He says, communication. He says, we need to communicate with our clients better. And that was what it was, for me going out there and communicating with them, resolve it. And I think that's what we have to think about today with the people on our projects, is communicate with them better. All right, we got to find out where they stand, how they feel about things. I saw an article the other day where somebody says that we used to ask people what they think about things. Today we ask people what they feel about things. I think that's coming with the younger generations. People think more in terms of feeling than they do about thinking. Emotions are a big part of how people work and how people live today, and especially with this virus going around. But I want you to know that this doesn't only apply when we have a virus or a storm or a hurricane coming. This also applies when our teams are every day. Even when things seem to be going well, we have to have a good idea of how everybody on the team is feeling. Do they have any personal problems or anything like that? And many of you know about the Tuckmans Stages of group development. You've probably read about this. Maybe you read it in the PMI, forming, storming, norming, performing, and later on he added adjourning or transforming or mourning, right, when the team finishes up what they're doing, which happens with project management at the end. But we, how many of us today have our teams in the storming phase with everything that's going on? And sometimes we just have to go around to the team and communicate to them. I mentioned last year about the GROW model. When we talk to people, let's get agreement on what our goal is. Let's talk about what the reality is around us. Let's look at the options, and let's look at the way forward, or what will we do, is the W. Thinking back to that story that I told about the servers that had a denial of service attack. If I would have known about this little acronym here for GROW, I could have told the team, what's our goal? It's to make sure the election can happen. What's the reality? We're seeing this problem with the processes. So what are our options? And maybe if we would have all talked about options, and maybe if I would have made sure that everybody on the team had a chance to speak, maybe, just maybe, we would have came up with the right result and been able to figure it out faster. And maybe I could have still been sleeping on the floor in the data center. So I told a few stories. I hope that they're helpful to you. Now I want to talk about application. I talked about the GROW model, and the goal of my talk is that I would be able to help you folks out to learn something about project management. The reality is I just gave you the whole presentation. The options are up to you. What can you do? What can you learn from this presentation? And then the W is, what will you do? So, if you take some time to think about it and write it down, then there's a better chance that you're going to be able to get it done. I tell a lot of people, if I write things down, there's somewhat of a chance I'm going to get to it. If I don't write it down, there probably isn't any chance I'm going to get to it. So take some time to write it down right now and think about what it is that you're going to do as a result of this presentation. I hope you learned something from it. Thank you all for your patience in listening to me. Thank you for all that you're doing to get us through the difficult times that we're going through right now. Thank you to the chapter for inviting me. I really appreciate it, especially to Kelly for inviting me back. I really appreciate getting a chance to know you guys. Feel free to contact me if you want to. Here's some of my contact information. Just do me a favor, if you do reach out to me, let me know why you're reaching out to me so I can distinguish you from some of the people that just try to connect out of the blue. Are there any questions or comments?
Any questions for Henry?
That was brief.
Yeah, just thank you so much, Henry, for gracing us tonight, putting this presentation together, and sharing all these great stories. They're just rich with experience and giving us a view of the world that certainly helps us all.
Yeah, sure that some of you will gain something from it that hopefully will help you in dealing with your teams going forward during this crisis we're going through. I really appreciate the fact that you folks asked me to speak, and I was able to, kind of mold this presentation to make sure that we brought up some of those points that I think are important for all of us that are leaders to think about with our teams. Today we're going to be finding that there's a lot of people that are under a lot of stressful situations, and we have to learn to be flexible with them. We need to learn to listen to them and hear how they're feeling and make sure that we give them the time to speak and give them the time to share.
Henry, in terms of managing projects, what would you say for some of the people who are working from home for the first time and trying to build their team remotely? Any suggestions on remote team building or just ways to advance the project with everybody being in remote locations?
Well, yeah, thanks, Kelly. There's a few things that I would suggest. One is, as a leader, make sure that everybody on your team has a little bit of time to try to get themselves into a comfortable working situation. I know that there's a lot of people out there that are dealing with more than just dealing with more than them just having to cope with this, but they're having to deal with other people that they support. People have family members that are in positions where they're at higher risk because of the type of jobs they have. And some people have jobs where all of a sudden the bottom fell out and maybe they're going to have to move in with their friends or their family. There's parents that have their children being home from school and they have to deal with, what time the school has set up various meetings and make sure that their children are on those calls. And sometimes even the parents have to be on some of the calls. There's people that are in the sandwich generation that have adults, elderly, that they have to take care of. And I know some of the people we know have adults that are in care facilities where they're not able to visit them anymore. And in some cases, they can't get through on the phone or they have to wait for these people to call them, which puts them in a really tough position as far as worrying is concerned. So one of the things that I think that we could do as leaders is, first of all, try to have a little compassion for people on our team and maybe talk to them and find out what you can do to help them with trying to organize their days and trying to organize their workspace so that they can get a little bit of work done. Another thing that we can do, I mentioned before, is try to have meetings on a regular basis that are over video. It's good to be able to see each other. I think it makes us all happier to be able to see another face, especially for those of us that are kind of isolating ourselves from others. It's a good thing to be able to see each other's faces, or even just to talk on the phone. Try to do one-on-one calls with folks so that you know that they feel comfortable just telling you, what's going on personally for them, and don't be afraid to ask them. The other thing is just as far as managing virtual teams is concerned and not dealing with the crisis that we have going on now, but just in general, working with teams like this is that you'll find that different people like to work different hours when they work at home. They may want to shift their hours according to what they have going on. Maybe they have, certain obligations to get kids certain places or to get them set up or whatever. So sometimes you have to have some flexibility there. But I think trying to get the team together on a regular basis, whether it be daily, I know that in Agile we usually have daily stand-ups where we get together for 15 minutes every day and get everybody on the phone. Everybody tell, what is it that you accomplished since yesterday? What are you going to be working on today, and do you have any blockers? We go around the whole team like that, and I think that's very advantageous to be able to hear each other's voices and to hear what everybody's working on and to ask questions. So that's very helpful too.
Those are good ideas.
Those are all really good ideas. Is there any other questions out there from our attendees? Well, with that, we are at the top of the hour. If the chapter has no further business, just take a look at your screen. A copy of this presentation, the recorded presentation, will be made available either at our Dropbox, our website at pmi-calumet.org. You can check us out on PMI Calumet Chapter Group on LinkedIn, or go to Twitter and find us at PMI Calumet. Henry, everybody, thank you for joining, and this concludes our business for tonight. Have a great evening and stay healthy, everybody.